because this is the bit that you've all come for, not the big long introduction. So what are we going to talk about? So the first thing is I thought I'd take you on a little bit of the journey of how we got to be here today. So why did we decide to bring this partnership of My Travel Research, Glow and Best Western together? What did we then actually go off and do? And a couple of big caveats that I want to talk through before we get into the findings. Then we will go into the findings. I've pulled some other stuff together as well and some key takeouts. And then finally, if you really wanted to know a bit more or to connect with it more, there are lots of ways to connect with what we've got here today. So let me just take you through some of those. Okay, so why did we do this? Now, since the bushfires in Australia last year, I've been having a lot of conversations and a lot of questions with people about what's going on, what should they do, is what we're already doing working, if not, what should we do about it? What we found was there weren't necessarily a lot of answers in the public domain, probably because people are just so busy trying to do stuff that they haven't necessarily been able to share all of that. So what we wanted to do was say, well, look, you know, what are the answers to some of the questions about what we should be doing and what's happening? And then what do we do about it next? Now, as we originally conceived this, when Oscar and I began talking about this research about a month, it literally is only a month ago, so it's scary how quickly this has all changed, that was the focus, but it became increasingly clear as we were designing the questionnaire that we did actually have to turn around and do something that recognized that we were in the next of our series of blows to our industry. So we had to do a little bit of a pivot at the beginning of last week to add some questions, very top line questions on COVID-19 as well. So this is my little figure dancing along here with the gymnastics, because sadly we're not going to need that figure for the Olympics this year. So we did do this. The final reason is all the way through, I've seen lots of people doing lots of great things to support this industry. I've worked in travel, tourism, aviation for 30 years, and I tried to think about what we could do that was specific to what we were trying to understand. And there's a lot of great research out there about kind of broader community responses. And I've quoted some of that later in here, but something that was across the whole industry, but you know, that linked to that wasn't specific to any particular campaign, was where we felt that we could do the best job of doing that. Apologies to our overseas listeners and members who are like, well, why are you focusing on Australia? It's still our largest customer base, and we did have that double whammy. I think many of the things that we're hearing and seeing here would be things that, reading across the research that I'm checking daily for other communities, would definitely be things that would apply in probably certainly most other mature markets, but specifically most other Anglophone, i.e. English speaking markets, or even some that are Anglophone and Francophone like Canada. So definitely things that we can bring out. So that was the why. Okay, what was the what? So we conducted a nationally representative sample of 1,200 Australians, which is, you know, best practice for the point of where you should really start to be doing this. And we conducted it, it was turned around very, very quickly between the 18th of March and the 23rd of March. So literally 3 days ago was when we were closing off the survey to do this. So it really, really is hot off the press. We'd originally tried to hold it open for 7 days, but what we found is people were responding so quickly. Hot tip, if you're thinking about doing research, people are stuck at home, this is a great time to be doing research right now. It was a 9-minute online survey, so we kept it short and sweet to get good levels of cooperation. And as I said, we used the Glow platform, which I've been working with. I'm really loving working with it. It's very much designed for people who are research passionates, going all the way up to, you know, sophisticates, but down to people who are just looking to do their own research. For those of you who are concerned about Australian privacy principles, what it also has is all data is stored here in Australia, and I know that's a concern for some listeners on the line. We sourced the participants from the Donata panel. There's a direct link between the platform and the panel, and this is Australia's largest online research panel. So that we were very, very confident that we are talking to a very representative audience of Australians. Because it's nationally representative, we've got a good spread across all the states and territories of Australia. Obviously, the largest population centres will tend to have the largest sample sizes, but that's also the people who are most likely to be affected. A good mix of men and women, slightly more women than men. And of course, in best practice, we did ask about people who identify as other types of sexuality. So we're non-binary measure, which you should all be doing on your surveys, by the way. We got a good range, as I said. It was fully representative by age and sex of everyone who was over 16. So we did screen out anyone who was under 16 for consent reasons. But basically, if you're over 16, you're in our sample at a level that the ABS tells us is representative of the population. So good mix of people. I have to say it's a pleasant surprise for me, because normally, as I had to explain to Oscar when we first started talking, normally I'm looking for needles in haystacks, somewhere between 1% and 30% incidence. You know, I get whoopee excited with a 40% incidence. So it was wonderful to actually have that fast turnaround and not have to slog to get participants. So I really enjoyed that side of it. Now, I mentioned a couple of caveats here. The first thing to note is this data is under embargo until we publish the report next week. This really is a sneak preview. Please, you're welcome to talk about it, but please don't share the data. Do hold out. So the second thing is, as we said, we literally finished the interviewing and pulled everything out of field on Monday. So it's very, very top line data. There may be more depth and reflection. I do want to spend the next few days until we publish the results next week, thinking and reflecting and chatting to Oscar about their broader survey experience outside travel to make sure that we really deep dive into this. It might be that what you hear today doesn't change, but it might be that things change as we come out and reflect and explore more. We did explore a couple of topics, particularly with regard to COVID-19. What I would say on this is we're exploring ideas here. We're here to push thinking. If anything you hear here contradicts public advisories, we don't win that argument, and we don't want to win that argument. We do not want to open you, your brand reputation, your customers, or any of your employees or you up to any risks. So please bear those caveats in mind as we go through. Okay, so let's get into the bit that everyone's really on the line for. So gradually I'm getting to that point, I promise. So the first thing we wanted to understand was a series of behaviors that people might have understood recently or have gone into, are planning to do, not just about travel, but also about some of the other responses that people might have had to the most recent bushfires to try and understand them. So the bar on the left, the kind of lighter, more orangey, warmer color, that's what people have done in the past 12 months. The darker, more brick colored is what they're planning to do in the next 12 months. The next 6 months. The reason we have put a different time frame on that, for those of you who are design fanatics, is my years of experience suggests to me that anything to do with things like travel, the next 6 months is a much more realistic predictor of what people actually do than the next 12 months. That's differential according to lots of trade-offs, but for this, we felt that that was a realistic understanding of the likely responses that people were really planning to take. So we asked them about a holiday or a trip or a break. We asked them about taking a holiday, trip or break overseas to see how those two were trading off against one another. We did want to look at day trips. I think day trips might have been, until we're all locked into self-isolation, day trips is going to be a very important market for all of us. And we tried to align that broadly with the NBS. The definitions may be slightly different, but broadly aligned with that. We also wanted to understand those behaviors about, look, you might not be traveling, but are you making donations? Are they regular ones? Are they one-off? Behaviors like the empty esky work, or supporting people by buying direct from suppliers at farmers markets and volunteering. So we really wanted to understand that context, and looking at some of the results, I'm really, really glad that we did that, because some of it is informing also some of the audiences that we need to be talking to. So now what we've seen is just over half, so I've said most, but just under half had actually said they'd taken a break, at least one night away from home. I do know from years of doing the Domesticate, that's probably an underestimate, because there's lots of what we call hidden travel by Australians, but we did have some good behaviours there. And what we did see was 2/5 of people saying, I am intending to take a trip in the next 6 months. Now, what I would say on that is, if you look at that timing, this was over the framework of escalating news about self-isolation and social distancing during that time. So I know that that will have suppressed some of that intention. The other thing I would say is, we were just coming off the back of Australia's peak holiday season. So we do know that normally we do see a dip in intention kind of around the February, March, apart from when people start thinking about Easter. And then beyond that, we do see a dip again. So definitely what we're seeing is day trips were really holding up. We did see a drop in intention overseas. Now, some of that could be about the escalating level of warnings. Some of that would probably be about what happened to the Australian exchange rate, but we did definitely see some of those things starting to come through. What we did see was people trying to buy direct from suppliers, intention on that, if anything, probably going up. Okay, so what impact did that have? Did the bushfires have on people's recent and future travel behaviour? So same colours, same pattern. So we talked to people about their most recent trip and any upcoming trips that they had. And what we did see was, in different ways, that people did respond to the appeal and the call for support for the bushfires. The most common response, around 1/4 of Australians, both recently and upcoming, was saying, my decision to go at all was influenced by the decision to support people. Next largest group were people who were saying we saw switching behaviour. You know, particularly people saying, look, I was going to take a trip anyway, but I decided to go and support destinations. And then a smaller group of people saying the switch was bringing it forward and staying away. Around 30% of people who had been or were planning a trip said, look, I haven't changed anything because I was already doing it, so there was nothing to change. But what we saw was that appeal did work. So 46% of people saying, yes, it influenced my decision in the past, and just over half saying it was influencing my decision in the future. And again, I think if we look at that timing, I think it does give us the start of some clues about how we can get people traveling when people are in a position to travel again. Okay, now we wanted to understand how the campaigns were working. Now, in a 9-minute survey, we obviously couldn't do a very deep dive on this, but what we did to do was to look at the strap lines and the taglines that people have been using, because that enabled us both to cover key promotional campaigns that are paid campaign, but also to look at earned media. Alongside those that are specific campaigns that were a response to bushfires and to some of the other activities that were going on, we did add in a couple of campaigns that were longer term. So I used one that, you know, Tourism Events Queensland have been using for a long time, have recently circled back to do, which is the beautiful One Day Perfect the Next, and the Emerging Tourism Tasmania Come Down for Air campaign, really to put those in. Alongside those that were specifically targeting the bushfires, we did, in terms of travel, we did include a few that were in here that were specifically, that were broader around response and supported people. The graph shows you the aided awareness campaign. When I looked at what people were saying, we actually asked people to name up to 5 things that they might have seen as campaigns that they'd seen that were top of mind for them. The highest top of mind ones that we saw in terms of what people were doing, they didn't tend to quote the lines. What they did tend to do was talk about the destinations, unless they were those more generic. So we saw New South Wales South Coast, Kangaroo Island, Gippsland, Malakuta, a few mentions of the Adelaide Hills, but those were really the top ones. On top of that, we did see those more general campaigns, Buy from the Bush, Empty Esky, Spend with Them, really coming up as things that were very much front of mind in consumers, which were about, we asked about promoting holidays, so definitely suggesting there is a halo effect from those campaigns as well. Now, none of these campaigns really got very, very high awareness on the strap lines. Bearing in mind, as I said, we had no visual content that was sat behind this. But the one that did really seem to stand out, apart from that long-term Queensland campaign, which was mentioned by 29% of people, what we did see was the Open for Business campaign was definitely the strongest. Now, I suspect that got a boost from the fact that the Australian Open and Tennis Australia were very, very active in supporting that campaign, and that broader business message coming through that it's open. But we'll also see that that is that message about aligning with other things is a very, very strong message to take out. Holiday Here this year, which was the National Tourism Australia campaign, was next. But I think what's quite interesting is a lot of clutter around the different campaigns coming out, a lot of them at about very similar levels of awareness, slightly lower for Book Them Out. But I think the timing of that, to me, that's a tactical campaign. And I think we'll see that it definitely did its job in terms of those unaided mentions, because Kangaroo Island particularly was a very strong mention, lots of mentions of South Australia. But I think tactical campaigns, they're really like fast food. They come in, they satisfy our hunger in the short term. We need to reflect on whether the job we're doing is really, do we need to get people traveling right now? Or do we need them to be kind of planning and booking and coming back and keeping that connection? The interesting one for me was Tourism and Events Queensland did their campaign around the bushfires was an alignment of their own long-term campaign and the Tourism Australia Holiday Here this year. And I think, bearing in mind they would have had those two things going together, that seemed to me, 12% alongside 14% for Holiday Here this year, does suggest that alignment of that mental hook for the consumer of that long-term campaign message coming through with that tactical link to a much larger campaign by Tourism Australia. I think we'll see that that's really paid off for them. So do be thinking about that. But as I say, as we go through and we dive in this, we really need to be thinking about that idea of urgency versus longevity in what we're trying to do. Again, we're deep diving into this at the moment. But interestingly, the places that people said they saw this, now TV always comes up top. Anyone who's ever done research on where people attribute advertising to, TV, despite the 2 screens age, or maybe even because of the 2 to 4 screens age that we live in, where people are consuming media across multiple platforms, visual is still very strong. But we did see people talking a lot about things like the news channels promoting these destinations, so definitely thinking about partnerships. And interestingly, people saying very, very strongly the digital ads are cutting through the clutter. So this really is that time when digital banner advertising and digital promotions are really starting to cut through and deliver for consumers. Okay. So we then said to people, okay, so we've got all of your interest coming through. What do you see as being the barriers to travel? What is driving that? Now, when we first conceived this, we were really trying to understand, specifically in relation to traveling to the bushfire reasons. Obviously, we had to do that pivot and add the issues on not wanting to travel due to coronavirus, etc. So we added those in, and unsurprisingly, given the timing that we were in field, those 2 items really stood out for us. So number one, I don't want to travel, but it's not because of the bushfires, it's due to coronavirus, because again, we'd seen that call to travel post the bushfires was starting to work. But what we've seen is that economic uncertainty and that fear of infection and responsible behavior really starting to impact our travel. Beyond that, the distance to travel to bushfire affected areas. Now, unsurprisingly, the further away that you lived, the longer the much more that was the case. So we really saw people in particularly WA, but also more remote areas of the NT, remote areas of South Australia, etc., saying that it's just too far compared to where I'm looking to go. But that reinforces both some long-term trends that we're aware of, but also what we believe will happen when people come back, which is local is going to be king. So really looking, in concentric circles out from where you are, those day trips becoming more important. So really thinking about distance to travel is there. But beyond that, the things that we did see was not knowing where and what's open, not knowing if suitable accommodation is available coming through. On top of that, 8% of people are already actively planning to make a trip. They don't see barriers other than doing the right thing. Now, who are those people? So they are the people who had traveled the most, who were taking a lot more frequency, those who, but interesting also, the higher your incidence of donating or, buying from farm gates or going to farmers markets, those types of things, those were the people who were most likely to be doing it. So if you're thinking about, doing any small advertising campaigns through social media, beyond looking at who's thinking about travel or planning travel, actually have a look at that as a way of opening up your destination to new audiences. Now, the other interesting one to me was this definitely over-indexed for regional New South Wales. We did see that, some of those people, I wonder if some of that might be, we had some rains during this period, not everywhere, but we know from some work that Rabobank and the farmers community have done that farming levels of optimism in those areas that have had rain are at a 20-year high. So we are seeing people starting to think about those things. Now, in terms of who's traveling most domestically, that still skews older. Those of you who've connected with Bronwyn White, MTR co-founder, will know she's very passionate about how seniors can help drive recovery for us. That said, they are the people who are in that don't want to travel to due to coronavirus rather than bushfires. They're obviously the most concerned because they're the most at risk. The other people that we did see worrying about getting time off skews very much to more highly educated people, but also skews younger. So younger people feeling more insecure in unemployment and definitely coming through on that. So definitely starting to see some of those things happen for us. The other thing that was quite interesting for me was worry about seeing the effect of damage on children. I thought that would come through more strongly for the family market, but it's actually those younger people maybe worrying about their siblings, not wanting to see that coming through. That skewed a little bit higher there. I can see there are questions, by the way. I will try, if it's okay with you, in the interest of people who may have to dodge off, answer those at the end. Okay, so this is where we do need to do a big thank you and a big shout out to Best Western Hotels and Resorts Australasia, who came in and sponsored this question, because it's very much looking at some of the things that they were trying to think about and do strategically. But as I said, I know it is a tough time for the hotel sector at the moment. So I really do, they've really often been the canary in the coal mine on some of this stuff because of lead times on booking. So I do want to thank them for their sponsorship of this question. So when we said, okay, now look at some of the ways, things that might encourage people to visit bushfire affected areas, we changed the caveats on that. So we did put a caveat around that saying, assuming there is no higher risk from COVID-19 than there is at home, what would persuade you to travel? Now, the number one reason was knowing that you were helping other Australians when they really needed it. So that was 22% of people. The third highest, 15%, saying a package where the percentage of the price went to support the recovery. There are many horrible things about what's happening in our world right now. But one of the things that we're really seeing is, ironically, the more we're told we need to stay apart, the more we want to come together, the more we've remembered that we are a community. And that is a powerful connection that we can make in talking to people and doing things. If people are able to travel, they definitely do want to have that information. So 16% saying I want more information on what's available and open for my chosen destination, or specifically that's relevant to my audience. This particularly important for older travelers, who we said are the people who travel most and are therefore, the most likely to be our early recoverers on this. The moment they feel confident it's safe for them to travel. So really, it is very, very important to give people that knowledge to plan confidently. Finally, with so much insecurity in the economy, as we've already seen, flexibility, the ability to change your booking dates with no penalty. Because their response, I will also shout out that Best Western were one of the first of any kind of travel or accommodation medium to say, we will hold your status points. Now everyone else has come out on that. So things that allow people to be flexible around the fact that none of us knows what's going on came through. Packages, we've continually, right back to the first Domesticate in 2006, we've continually heard people tell us packages make things real for people and help people plan confidently. So as well as knowing they're doing good, something that makes it easy to do that job of knowing what's available for a trip is there. Now, a pass that gives you a good range of discounts, normally I would expect to see that right up at the top, but this is very much in line with some global trends that we've seen, that there are audiences that need that. They tend to be kind of families, lower income groups, but very, very much coming through. Some of the other drivers outside the top 5, probably the first thing to flag for you is to say the numbers between the top 5 and these are not that great. So one of the things we saw in terms of what are going to be the drivers of getting people traveled, they are very, very varied. So, you know, it's almost the reverse of the famous Tolstoy thing about all happy families are happy in the same way and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. Much more consistency about the barriers than there are about the drivers of travel. Now, I think there's some very interesting things. So I've started to drill down in this. We will be drilling down into this because it's exceptionally complicated what's going on. We did see around 10% of people saying that they were looking at mystery trips. The old Qantas mystery flights will be a great way to get people traveling again once they are able to travel. One of the things we've heard historically was concerns about taking leave or coming through that were very important. Now, all of those things are much lower, but where we did see that they were knowing that you could get time off or barriers to taking time off, again, very much please bear in mind that's our younger Australians are feeling most insecure about that. So I do think that that will change as the economy softens. People will not want to leave their jobs because there'll be that fear if you're not at your desk, you'll be the first person to be culled. So I think if we are looking at those things and we are encouraging people to travel, if we sit on the periphery of our industry, I think it's important to be saying to people that's not necessarily where we are, and thinking about how we can use paid leave to get people traveling again if they've got any paid leave left, because I think that's where the big fear is now. Relative to most other advanced economies, Australians have relatively ungenerous levels of sick leave. I know it doesn't feel like that to many employers on the line, but you know, when I moved here from Europe, I was slightly stunned to learn I had 8 days of sick leave in my first year. In the UK, I had 3 months on full pay and 3 months on half pay. So Australians squirrel paid leave away. But if you're looking to get that paid leave off your balance sheet, if you haven't managed to get people to do it at the beginning of the holidays, beginning of this period, it might be something to think about going forward. So going back to some of those messages, we did ask people, and again, I want to emphasize, we only use the strap lines in this. When we looked at the calls to action, which messages resonated and how, we did ask people which were most appealing to them, which made them want to find out more, and which made them want to actually go away and visit. Now, strongly the most appealing was that, you know, the kind of variable, the Queensland beautiful one day perfect the next, which has been around for a long time, and you know, is not about what's going on right now. So we know that that message would have those things. But interestingly, you know, that short stay going a long way, the Visit Victoria campaign, definitely getting that message out there that this is benefit. So we really saw that aligning with the consumer mindset in terms of what's going on in terms of that. Ready to welcome you, open for business, holiday here this year, all around that level of appeal. The beautiful place, all at that level. So again, we're seeing that clutter in the market is dividing people's logic. When we made people look at what's going out there, we really did see those two campaigns consistently coming through. So beautiful, a short stay goes a long way. A beautiful one day perfect the next, and then finally dialing up at this find out more and convert people. That balance that Tourism and Events Queensland have done between using their long-term assets but linking it to other campaigns, and that call to action now seem to be working pretty well for them. So linking that, so as I say, linking it to broader messages, showing that you're benefiting communities, and some stuff about the highly tactical. So that tactical short stay goes a long way seemed to be working. Now, as I said, the Book Them Out campaign was into market and out of market a little bit quicker. I'm going to show you the metrics that SATC shared with at the Mumbrella Summit last week later in this presentation. So I do think what you do need to bear in mind with those very urgent tactical campaigns, they are fast food. So think about how you're using them, because that is not going to be a long stay. That's not to say it won't succeed in its own terms, but it will say you need to think about what success is going into it in terms of how you deploy those. Okay, so let's have a little look at the issue of COVID-19 and travel to escape it. So this was one of the questions that we added very last minute, where we said to people, we looked at the idea of what I first heard the Sydney Morning Herald use the phrase a sea changer with a letter C rather than the words SEA. So we asked people about whether they were interested in becoming sea changers. So basically, would they consider going to a regional area, take travel to a regional or remote or less densely populated area to escape? We asked them about whether they would consider kind of holding up and working remotely, or whether it was more about leisure. Now, this is a principle that has an honourable antecedent. This is something that people did in during the bubonic plague in Europe in the 17th century. They did it during World War I, they did it during World War II to escape bombing. So there is a long tradition of what you might call the funk hole thinking. And that's the phrase that was used in World War I and World War II. In World War I, it was used in the front line. In World War II, it was Londoners escaping the bombings. Now, what we found is around a quarter of people would consider going and working remotely. Now, as I say, I really want to be careful about the fact that what we're talking about here is thinking outside the square. If it were in line with government sanctions about travel that said this was an okay thing to do, this could be an excellent way to get people to be thinking about regional relocation. So at the point where this is something where government's saying it's okay to travel but use caution, this could be something. And I noticed, for example, Quest Apartments yesterday actually did hold up. They used a different approach. They're saying we're going to offer people quarantine. So something to think about there. Where people did say was just get away from it all. Half of people said I would be open to considering this. Now, what's very interesting about this is this strongly skews to millennials and Gen Zers. And what we have seen on this was that on this whole issue, we have seen a definite generational divide on responses to this. In defense of young people, even though I'm not a young people, we have huge intergenerational inequality in most advanced economies. And I think young people are taking a bit of revenge here, which is you get all the property, you get the super funds, you get the secure jobs. We don't get COVID-19. Is an understandable, if not entirely nice response to some of that. So I think we are now coming together, and I think it's an opportunity for us all to be united on that and getting the message out that actually young people get COVID too. But definitely this might be something where it could be a solution. It got me wondering, you know, if young people are reluctant to do this, can we actually use some remote locations to get them to self-isolate in a different way? Would this work? As I said, please don't go against any travel guidelines on this, but I'm throwing that out there to think about as a policy response. Okay, some more general questions beyond travel about preparedness for COVID-19. So we asked people, I want you to bear in mind, this really was quite recent. So just a week ago, we were starting to ask this question. The majority of people who answered this question would have been doing this in the face of the escalating restrictions on what we were doing. And some of them would have been answering it as we actually got to total travel bans and please stay home. How do you feel if we go into lockdown? How prepared do you feel? So 78% said they kind of felt prepared to at least somewhat prepared to very prepared, but literally only 1 in 10 feels like they're very prepared, which is roughly the same as the proportion of people who do not feel prepared at all. And again, it looks like this is pretty universal. We'll be drilling down a little bit more into who those people are. But nevertheless, I think it's safe to say that only 2 in 5 Australians really feel like they're prepared or strongly prepared for this. So there is a lot that we can do to help our communities. Those of you who are working with local councils, in a moment, I'm going to show you why this is important. So we said, if where you are is going into lockdown, whose job is it to tell you about this? Now, we know that national government and state government will be an important part of this, but we actually wanted to kind of not have that drown out everything else on this ranking question. So we looked beyond those. We know for the big health announcements, some of that stuff is going to be there. But what did we see when we took those 2 groups of people out of the equation? Local is king. So if you look at the green, the dark green and the mid green, if you look at those 2, you will see those are the people that we think are the most important people to communicate with us. And what we did see is at times like this, Australians turn back to and look to experts. You know, 3-4 years ago, Michael Gove in the UK was saying people have lost trust in experts. They may have lost trust in economic and social scientists, but they haven't lost a hunger to hear from authority, and they haven't lost a hunger to hear from experts in these kind of much more concrete scientific ways. We know levels of trust for government are pretty low lying at the moment globally. I'm in the report, I'll be bringing in and comparing this to some of the Edelman Trust Barometer to the different levels of government to understand how this fits together. But #1 ranking by an absolute country mile, 77% of people rank 1 or 2. Local councils are who they are looking to help them prepare. And I think that's because the general announcements will apply, but knowing what's open locally, what businesses are doing can really, really help. And I was on a call yesterday with Central Coast Council and the Tourism Central Coast group that I work with. And we were really talking about some of the initiatives that they've done. So really, this is that opportunity for local councils. I know most of you hear from your ratepayers most of the time bitching. This is the time when it's really the point to show people why you are the preeminent level of government that really matters to people when the chips are down. For those of you who are working for tourism bodies, 77% of people said that you were next, but really we're looking to our employers, we're looking to the people that we have the most direct relationships to. But tourism bodies do have a role to play, probably about mid-ranking compared to some of the others coming through. But as I say, really local councils, we're looking to you to help us. Now, I mentioned that tactical versus longevity. So I thought I'd share with you some insights that Brent Hill shared at the recent Umbrella Travel Marketing Summit on what they did, because the Book Them Out campaign was one of the first campaigns into market, and you know, so they've actually got that. So some of the learnings, if you are looking at those tactical campaigns, and if you're looking to do things through social at the moment and talk to people who travel, empathy is #1. I know Andrea Pawlutsky from Amplify Me, who also works with Best Western, has been talking about, when we're talking about all of this language, whatever we're doing, think about our communities, think about our audiences and what they're going through. Make sure we have permission to talk on behalf of our communities, and make sure that we have permission to the audiences to talk about that. And I'll share some insight on that in a moment. Make sure, alongside the inspirational messages that you may be putting out, that you do actually put out messages that you do have that one-stop shop. So yesterday with Tourism Central Coast, we were sharing what Tourism Australia were doing. We were sharing what Destination New South Wales, because that's a New South Wales destination, are doing. We are pointing people to the authorities, because if you have that authoritative knowledge alongside your more inspirational, the lesson that SATC had, that then buys you the credit to talk about other messages. So do not, again, that's why that caveat about do what we are being advised by responsible authorities to do is so important. And tell people those things that they need to do. Do not contradict that. Really use that, leveraging the partners and the relationships that we saw in the findings. We saw, you know, how open for business, MTSG, buy them out, all of those campaigns really seeming to work and leak into the halo effect of the travel space. So use all of the available tools. It's a great time to make an inventory of who you can be working with and making sure you're doing it. I think the other thing is be very, very clear about what you want to do. Be very simple. Do not overcomplicate the message. I appreciate everyone who is working on this is absolutely exhausted. We're either in the situation where people are overloaded or they're newly unemployed. There's no one who's got that balance right at the moment. However tired you are, get someone else to check it. Be very clear about what your purpose of what you're trying to do is. I know this is particularly a challenge for government and local councils who worry about things. Allow shareability, allow people to be there. Don't worry if they're going to get it slightly wrong. You can monitor what they're doing. If it's really something that you're worried about, that's a brand reputation issue, you know, you can shut down those messages very clearly or have a dialogue with them. Right now, it's much more important to get people sharing those messages. So for that tactical stuff to really deliver in the short term, I think it's really important to be thinking about those things. So this is some research that's from 35,000 consumers globally, because one of the most common questions I've got is, should we be out talking to people at the moment? They can't travel anywhere. My message so far is absolutely that you should be. So I was interested to see this. If you remember our 11% of people who were saying, you know, talk to me, only 8% of people think brands should stop talking to them right now. What they do believe is you need to change that message. So it should be helpful, daily life, should inform people what you're up to. People are not averse to humor if it's done properly. That's a little bit more nuanced. So think about who your brand is and be careful how you use humor. But if your brand has humor, it is absolutely the case we all need a bit of a laugh right now. 74% said do not exploit this. So we saw in this research, they saw IKEA, who've talked about home. They saw Nike talking about responsible exercise, was seen as getting it right. Too heavy a branding, so Brewdog doing a great job of making hand sanitizer, but their stuff was so heavily branded, people were a bit like, are you doing this to help or are you doing this to talk? So getting that balance right. So I've included the quote from my friend Rosie Hawkins at Kantar, which is, talk about it, support, but don't exploit. Ask yourself, is this helpful? Is it there? Reassurance, we need good news stories. Make sure that you really understand your brand and you know how to communicate through the lens of your brand values. This will avoid you getting lost in the clutter and it will really make your messages resonate. Show how you're caring for your people. Show how you're doing flexibility. So, you know, all of those more corporate messages are actually really strong messages to consumers at the moment. How are you protecting things? If you're not in that area, how can you actually make donations of products? So, you know, if you're a bakery or, you're a restaurant, can you be doing deliveries to people? And we've seen some great examples of, Pret a Manger in the UK is doing, free deliveries of sandwiches to health workers. Many of whom are struggling to get to the shops. I know my sister works in the health system in the UK. This is very important. So those are some of the other things to do. Now, many of you be sitting there going, I don't even have a skerrick budget to do this. I will talk about that. Okay, so key takeouts from our research before I open up the questions. And thank you, I can see there are questions there. We definitely saw the campaigns that we had in market to support the regions were starting to work. They were shifting behavior. They were creating desirable behaviors. We do understand COVID-19 is now overtaking that, but there are some lessons that we can take from this to learn on that. The things that so far seem to be working best, and again, as we drill down, anyone who's listening on the line, if your campaigns were mentioned and you've got some insight to share with me that you think might inform that reporting, I would love to have those. Linking to existing campaigns or very direct messages about benefits or tactical messages seem to work best. People's return to holidays, I think, will need to be more of a holiday. That hunger for connection is there. That ideal mix will be a benefit plus flexibility, but they also need to know what they can and can't do. We're looking for win-win-win options. It's good for me, it's good for you, it's really coming through there. Barriers are really complex. One I've realized I forgot to mention earlier, older travelers and those who travel most and those who donate to charity who are most likely to return first, you've really got to be telling them that you are ready for them, that you're not going to be a burden on them. But the barriers, apart from that, COVID-19 are quite complex. We really need to be drilling down and address that. If we can find a way to leverage it that's in response to government advice, there is an untapped demand for sea changes. As I said, perhaps this is the answer to getting young people to self-isolate. And I do think those of you, and I know there are a lot of councils on the line today, there is a major opportunity for councils to remind people why local is king and why you are a really important part of their lives. So some couple of great examples of some stuff that's working. Oh, it's not coming up. I'm sorry, that's really not working. The Shed Aquarium in Chicago. If you haven't seen the penguins going around the aquarium, and I know hundreds of thousands of people around the world have, and they've been mentioned on Channel 4 in the UK, they've been mentioned on the ABC here, they've been mentioned in CBS, they've been mentioned in Travel Weekly. Check out the penguins in the aquarium. This is a social media feed done by the people who are responsible for looking after the animals. It is amazing and heart-lifting. Visit Portugal are doing the inspiration job. Pause, reflect, don't travel now, but we're ready for you when you come back. I will put those in the final version of the slides that we share with you. If you'd like more beyond the questions today, we're working with Glow and with Best Western to delve deeper into the findings. We will have the report out. As I said, we're working alongside Glow to get the report out next week. If you're an MTR member, it will be shared on the site with you, as will a recording and any updates and an infographic. We will also be sharing this via the Glow publications platform for everybody else. We are making the full report of this research freely available to the industry. It is our gift to you. But please do remember the embargo when you're sharing this, if you're talking about it. We want to respect the investment that Glow and Best Western have made in this. And as soon as it's out on the Glow platform, we will be letting you know. And when it is, we want you to share it to death. We would love to see your comments. We would love to see your feedback. As people who live and die by evidence, brickbats are as valuable as bouquets. But we would love to hear from you. So thank you very much. Oscar, I might just hand over to you while I go through the questions. Is there anything you wanted to add or draw out at this point as well?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Brilliant delivery as always. Thank you very much. I hope, guys, that you enjoyed as much as we did, and you found it useful, and probably start like taking some of those questions to us, to the community, and then start getting contact, right? So if you're in local councils, then start like engaging and probably how you communicate with the people within your community. If you are in the tourism industry, start thinking that yes, we are experiencing some difficult times, but as Caroline mentioned, this is a time to actually start running research and then start planning, because at some point we will lift those barriers and then that travel ban, and we need to actually start cutting through what are those areas and how can we actually just get to the community and passing that message. So to me, it's one of those takeouts that will be open for business is one of those. One of those drivers is for the community to know what is open and what can be done, and start thinking about that exploration of ideas and previous policies, as Caroline mentioned, is if assuming that COVID-19 wasn't on the table, what can you do to actually self-isolate? And if you are safe, how can you help those regional affected areas? As a community, we need to actually start sponsoring more of those areas. They were impacted by the bushfire. Now they're impacted by COVID-19. I believe, since I moved to Australia, it's a country that believes in solidarity. And so then we are here for Australians.
Brilliant. Thanks, Oscar. I was trying to see, I think the guys from Best Western were on the line, but they've had to dash off. We've got some great feedback from people, so thanks for all the kind comments. Some of your takeouts, local is going to be king. Love it from Lisa. That's great. Now, Nigel raised a question. Thank you. This is really great. Question 36, an initiative wherein all Australians pledge to visit a regional area. Nigel, you were asking me, is this more highly indexed to a younger group or an older group? I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I will make sure I draw that out in the final report. So, and you will, as I say, be getting an invite to the link to the final report when we go out with that. I've had some requests from some of the STOs whether they can chat to me offline. Yes, I will be. If anyone's asked me to contact me offline, I will very happily talk through that. As I say, my email address is on the page. I'm feeling very selfish and greedy because I didn't put Oscar's up, but you will have, following this email, you will get, following this webinar, you will get an email from Oscar and myself with that. So if you've got any questions about what we're doing and whether there's ways to use what we've done and some of the other things that you might want to do, both Oscar and my emails will be in there. So that's it. So now, so I've had a lovely feedback from the far south coast of New South Wales. Jenny, I hope you're still on the line. You've absolutely made my day that it was helping user people who are in the front line, because that is just so important to all of us. In, you know, when I first started chatting to Oscar about this a couple of months back, it was really people like you that this was for. So you can probably hear I'm tearing up a little bit here. If it's worked for you, then everything that we did with this has done its job for us. So and as I say, very much, I know that I can speak for Oscar as well. That, you know, that's really, this is sitting with where this is why we do what we do, and this is why we wanted to work together on it. So thank you very much. Just quickly, any more questions that people would like to kind of put in there or talk about while we're going through? So no, I think we've kind of got everyone, and we're coming up to the 1 hour we allocated. So I did want to just respect everyone's time. And thank you everyone for joining us. As we say, we will be doing a lot more collaborations together, and Oscar, feel free to chip in. So if you've got ideas for collaborations or you've got questions about what could be done, I mean, some of those might be self-funded, but some of those could be, we could be looking at ways to do syndicated partnership research. If people haven't got a lot of money but do have a little bit, we could be looking at some things to do in that space as well. So do feel free, when you get the follow-up email on this, to connect to either Oscar or myself on that. And as I say, finally, did want to thank Graham and Andrea at the team in New South Wales. So tell us when I'll be down here later in the year, Jenny. I can't wait to get down to you guys. Free kayak tour. I just actually bought my own inflatable kayak today, so I can social distance and take exercise. So I might not take you up on that, Jenny. I might still actually pay a bit, but I would love to come down and see how you're applying the research. So great stuff, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Okay. Question from somebody who said, can we hear about vendor sentiment? I think I can say on that, Nigel, I know for a specific audience, I'm not sure if she's on the line today, Bron White, formerly my partner, is actually doing some work on that, on vendor sentiment at the moment. But Oscar and I will very much take that online, and that's something that we could potentially look at doing. So anything else? No, that's all it. Cool. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up because we're up at the hour, and speak to you soon. Take care, everyone. Thank you.